recording here.
Okay. Do you want me to start, or do you want to start at 6? Because I think that's, are you in a different time zone than me? Are you guys in the Eastern time zone?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
Eastern time zone. Typically we start at about 6:30. You know, we have people start showing up at 6 here, and grab some pizza and stuff like that. Like I say, I'm a little bit sort of expecting a few people to pop in online, but I'll keep an eye on that separately.
Okay. Sounds good. Then we will just go ahead and get started. I can see all of you guys. So, hey everyone, thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm excited about it. It's interesting to do a user group that is not local to me. So this is kind of a first. This is going to be moving to modern SharePoint a million easy steps. Of course, we're going to dig into that deeper. Before we get started, since we don't know each other yet, just a very quick about me. My name is Nick Brattoli. I'm an Office Apps and Services MVP, mostly SharePoint. I do a ton of SharePoint migrations. I'm also an MCT, so Microsoft Certified Trainer, Collab 365 Community Manager. So if you've ever been to collab365.community, there's a lot of content on there that is relevant to our discussion tonight, as well as anything else around Microsoft technologies. And in my day job, I run a small consulting company doing exactly what we're talking about. Migrations are kind of my bread and butter. So without any more of that, let's get into it. So first thing we want to do is talk about modern SharePoint Office 365 and what we're talking about. You can see in the background that is a communication site. Is there anyone in here who is already using modern sites, team site communications? Show of hands. Yeah, so you're a little bit mix of both, modern and classic. Okay, so you know the benefits of going to modern SharePoint, right? There's a lot of new graphical stuff. It's a lot easier for the users to build things. The web parts are really cool, but there's downsides to it. But again, you can see. Sorry, did you have a question?
No. We just started blasting the audio.
No, I blasted the audio into the store here. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. So yeah, so you get all the modern stuff. You're familiar with what those are. Teams, especially, we're using it right now. Teams is kind of the breakout new technology of that. But Teams, Power Apps, Flow, all of this stuff works with classic SharePoint, but it works best with modern. And some people aren't even on SharePoint Online. Seems that you guys are, but you may be on-prem. You can't use all of this stuff in the same way on-prem. So in order to get to modern SharePoint, Office 365, using all of the cool stuff, there's a lot of work to do between here and there. You can't just say, I have some data, throw it up in modern, and you're good to go. Since you're doing a mix of those two things, I think you already know this, but there's a lot that needs to go on, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So first thing is you need to do a ton of discovery on this. I would say half or more of the entire migration project. Whether or not you're doing a migration, maybe you're starting from scratch, you should still be doing a ton of discovery. So that's figuring out, where are you right now? What do you have? And that could be, you have an old version of SharePoint. Maybe you're using classic sites in SharePoint Online. Maybe you're on G Suite like Google. Maybe you use Dropbox. Maybe you just have some file shares. There's a lot of other things you can be moving from rather than just old SharePoint. And the steps are kind of the same. Right? So first thing, you need to perform a technical discovery. I think this part is the most apparent. You probably have already done this on the migrations you've done before. You guys have done migrations before, right? Or at least tiny ones. Hands for yes. Kind of see you. A little bit. Are you currently moving toward a migration, or just general modern SharePoint?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're working on it. Gotcha. It's a big job, even if you're in a small company. I don't know what size company you're with, but whether you're big or small, you have to do a ton of discovery. So first thing, technical discovery. There is a lot that can be done here, and this is where you'll get your main working documents, but there's a lot of business discovery you need to do afterwards. But during the technical discovery, use third-party solutions if you can, for sure. I use ShareGate typically if you've got SharePoint. If your source material is in SharePoint, ShareGate makes really good reports on stuff. Of course, other third-party migration tools like Metalogic/Quest. There is AvePoint, there's BitTitan. There's a ton of migrations programs, and all of them are great. But depending on what you're going to need to pick one depending on what you're starting off with. Also get comfortable with PowerShell because there's a ton of things you can do just with PowerShell, especially if you're in SharePoint on premises. You can kind of spit everything out. It's a little more manual than doing it with a third-party solution, but if it's not in your budget to spend a few $1,000s, maybe you're going to have to spend that in labor instead, but you can still get kind of the same information. You want to create a site architecture report of your current architecture. So where does your data live? How is it nested? Because if you're using old classic SharePoint, it's probably a bunch of subsites. So you need to capture all of that to see what's going to break if you move things, right? You just want to get a big inventory of everything. If you are going to if you're going to say SharePoint 2019, you may want to take some server architecture as well, just because you're going to have to design some server architecture for 2019. So that may be something that you need to look at while you're doing this.
What kind of data would you capture in that report?
In the architecture report, so I typically, again, I use ShareGate to spit this out, and I would do a site report, and it would give you all your site collections, all the sites that are inside them, what the hierarchy is, and on top of that, you can do separate reports as well, which I'll talk about in a second. But basically, you just want to get a list of all your site collections, all the sites that are in them, and where they live in a hierarchy. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And you can do that with PowerShell. It's just kind of complicated because PowerShell doesn't let you really go through all of them at once. You can write a script to do so, but otherwise you're going through one at a time and writing these down. The third-party tools just make it faster. So, I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry, I was just surprised the microphone's working as well as it is. So.
Oh yeah, no, it works pretty well. So anyway, after you've got that first report, then make sure you don't have any custom solutions. If you have an old on-prem SharePoint, I bet you have a ton of solutions. If you got 2007 or 2010, you had to do custom stuff all the time back then. I would not fault someone for having a ton of custom solutions that do things you can do now out of the box. But you have to make sure you take an inventory of those because they're probably not going to work when you move them into modern SharePoint. You're probably best off just leaving them behind. But you do need to make sure you track those and capture them because you're going to have to make some decisions. There might be some users that really like those old custom solutions, and you might have to fight a battle about it. So make sure you track that. Create a permissions report. This, to me, is another one of those incidental things where it's like the site architecture report. You want to get everything and get permissions and see who has access to what, but keep in the back of your mind that you kind of want to tear some of this out when you redo your governance later. But you definitely want to have a good snapshot of where you're at. Especially if you have an old SharePoint site that's been around for a while, or even worse, a G Suite where there's no such thing as governance and permission. There's probably a bunch of like random explicit permissions around, and you need to catch all of that because things are going to break in the future if you don't. You need to address it sooner rather than later. Okay, content reports. That's another thing where you kind of look at certain pages, and that's a little bit more manual because you can't really do automated reports on what's in the pages, but you can kind of get an inventory of how many pages there are, how many documents there are, so you can say, oh, we're gonna have to move 10,000 documents this week. It's just good to know how many documents you have. And again, you may not be moving all of those, and you're probably not going to go through them one by one. I definitely don't recommend doing that. But you want to document everything that you can. And again, if you're using a third-party tool to do this, most of these reports are built in, and you just pick some reports and spit them out. If you are not the stakeholder doing this, if it's like marketing or somebody else who's in charge of this migration, they will really appreciate all that documentation. Finally, do some spot checks with manual discovery to see, just look at it and see, is the design consistent? Is there anything weird that you didn't notice? Is there a bunch of stuff called like Bob's site and it's clearly not used? Just things like that to get a general cross section of what you look like technical wise. And this is something you as IT can do. If you're an outside consultant, you can do this piece on your own. You don't need any business users to do this part, but it's very important. Unfortunately, it's not the only thing. Do you guys have any questions about this technical discovery piece before I move on? This could honestly be a whole session on its own. I'm kind of condensing it. Good? Okay. So you've got your reports for technical discovery. You can make some assumptions off of looking at those reports, but as an IT or even an outside consultant, you're not going to know how that information is used as much as your business users are going to. So after you have your reports and you've made some basic assumptions, you're going to have to actually talk to some business users. And that's not the best but thing sometimes if you're not a people person, or if you're spread out a lot, or if you're a huge company, but it's really important. So what do you need to do for that? You need to meet with the content owners. Just like you need to have a cross section of what your technical information looks like, you need a cross section of what your business looks like. You need to know who are the people of your company. So maybe that's different departments, maybe that's different groups, maybe different divisions. And you need to figure out who of those people own which content. Part of that is pretty easy to find with those reports that we were talking about on the previous slide. Right, you can get that from a technical report. You can see who owns a specific site, but you don't know necessarily how much they use it or how important it is or how much on that site is used. So you need to figure out who owns the content, maybe from the technical discovery. Maybe you have to do some detective work or have someone else do some detective work down the line. But you have to meet with them. You need to figure out what do they do now, not only how do they use SharePoint or Google or whatever your current technology is, what else do they do in their job? Because you may be able to solve some things down the line that they didn't even know about, no one ever considered, and you become a hero or it may help you in the future when you're fighting a battle over a feature that doesn't exist anymore, because I'll tell you, you will fight those battles. So get some of that like tertiary information along the way and just put a pin in it. Remember it for later. So who owns the content? What do they do now for their job? How do they manage the content on their current environment? Are they the only manager? Are there more? Because those reports are probably only going to give you one person. Maybe it's not one person. Maybe it's a group of people. Okay, so how is it managed? Maybe IT manages it all. I hear that a lot. That's not good. So if they tell you that, that's fine, but it's a data point that you want to show people of, hey, this is why our SharePoint environment is not adopted. It's because it's all falling on IT and you can't deal with it. Right. Who looks at this? Who's allowed to look at it? So that your permission reports tells you one thing, but those could be outdated. They could have been done with little to no oversight. They may not be very good. So ask from a high level, who's really looking at this information? Okay, and is any of that content sensitive or private? If you print out a piece of this and leave it in a taxi, is that a problem? Are you going to go to jail? Right, so you need to know kind of how important the data is, who owns it. Right? There's a lot of other questions that you may come up with along the way, but these are kind of the base things you need to figure out. Who manages it? Who sees it? How important is it? How much of it is there? Right, how old is it? And are there any regulations that you have to meet when you're storing or sending this information? What industry do you guys work in, both of you guys?
I'm working in the telecommunications.
Okay. So you probably don't have to worry too much about like accounting or HIPAA or anything like that. But I'm sure there's other internal policies you may have to comply with. Well, telecom has tons of regulations too, I'm sure. So those are things that you may need to figure out during discovery. And the easiest way I found to have these conversations and to answer these questions as quickly as possible is to conduct surveys. And this doesn't necessarily have to be you who conducts the surveys. Maybe you're just the one who looks at the information. Maybe you've got a bigger team, or maybe you are a one-person team. But it's very easy to put together a survey that you can quantify. And again, you're trying to figure this out, how to use the current system. What's your opinion of it? And that usually is really fun because you can make some pretty graphics when you're showing executives or whoever's got to pay the bill later why everyone hates SharePoint or Google Sites right now. So add some questions about what do you think about it? Do you have any problems with security? Right? And basically figure out what I'm talking about. Who do you work with? Who sees this stuff? What pain points do you run into? Anything else? What about your daily job? Are there any pain points you have with your daily job that maybe technology could help with, or maybe not? You just kind of, and you quantify it and put that in a report as well. Any question on how to do that? I typically build like a Power App or a Microsoft form for the report. You can send it via email and have people fill it out. If you already have an existing SharePoint site, you can embed it or link to it. Or you could do them in person and fill out Word documents. The important thing is that you're capturing that information from a cross section of your users. Doesn't need to be everyone who uses it, but maybe a couple of heads of different departments and a couple regular users as well, just so you get an idea of what your entire company's doing. Make sense?
How do you usually manage this in relation to the last step of talking with different people? Do you send them a survey first and then follow up in person, or vice versa?
So it depends. I'm an outside consultant, so I usually am only in for a small period of time, but I'm working with internal groups. So typically I find the internal group who owns the project, and they help facilitate rounding up who the owners are. They'll look at the technical reports and they'll be like, this person doesn't work here anymore, or this makes no sense, this person doesn't really own this. So they do some of that detective work for me, and you're going to have to do that, because if you're in IT, you know from a high perspective what everyone does, but you're not going to know that off the top of your head on a low level what they're all doing. So the surveys, yeah, we do typically send the surveys out first ahead of time. I think it's most beneficial to send it ahead of time and then schedule a series of meetings with the different groups. Do 1 or 2 groups at a time, depending on how big they are, and do that over a couple weeks. I typically do 6 to 9 months for a whole migration from bottom to top of I'm a consultant that you've never met before to you're launching your new intranet. So 6 to 9 months, and a good half of that or more is this discovery piece. So you send it to them first, and then you have a follow-up meeting where you actually ask the questions, because I like to, while I'm conducting these surveys, show them some demos or paint pictures in their head of, well, what if it worked this way? Would you like that? And then that will help you kind of design what your end product is going to be as well. Because you look at it and like, well, their current processes are garbage. But what if it looked like this? And they sometimes are able to picture that conceptually and help you steer. Good question, but yeah, the more involved you can get with them, the better. If you just send this or embed it on a page and expect them to fill it out, you're only going to get like a 20% at best response. If you can get the owning department to round people up and schedule real meetings, you'll have a lot better response. I think we had like an 80% response doing it that way.
Nice. Would you be able to get a copy of your slides here?
Yeah, you can have a copy of this.
Okay, great. I'd love to be able to reference those questions.
Sure. And I have some reports. I'll see if I can get those together and clean those up. But I've got some samples. The way I spit this out, and I'm about to talk about it right now, is I spit this out in like a package of reports before we then go and do. I like to spit out everything in a series of deliverable packages so that you're getting sign-offs on things. And if people see documentation on everything, they can't. You're covering yourself. Again, as an outside consultant, this is super important for me, but internally it's very beneficial too when you're navigating through those political situations. So your outputs of this are quantifiable opinions. So you get, when you're asking people what they like to rate the looks and stuff, do like a star rating 1 through 5, and you can make a chart off of this in PowerPoint or in Excel or whatever you want to do, and make little pretty graphics. And I'll show you that later on, what some of those look like. You get a list of items that are pain points that you can pull out of your back pocket later and solve and look like a hero. You will probably find some people during those surveys that you can consider a champion, where they're like, this is really cool. When can my team get this? Those are the people that you want to solve a what's in it for me problem, and we'll talk about that later. But those are the people you want on their side for later when you're getting ready to launch and you still have people who don't want to change and move to the new stuff. You've got this other group saying, look at this awesome thing that we have. And you'll get organic adoption that way. And engaging these users early like this with this survey allows you to identify some of those people. And of course, you have a report of the survey, and I'll show you what one of those looks like. I typically spit it out into a PowerPoint with some pretty graphics. That if you want to, the goal is that you could show this to an executive who is very far removed to this and say, I see this. This makes sense. I know what I'm paying for when I sign the check. And you also have stuff to work off of when you're actually doing the work. Okay, so we've got raw data. We know what the users think. We know what they do. We know what we have. What do we do now? Now we need to think about what all that information means. We're going to come up with a plan. And again, we're going to make our documentation even prettier and spit out that PowerPoint at the end. So, analyzing first. This is what I was talking about with those surveys that you asked. So some of the questions are very easily quantifiable, yes or no, star rating, thumbs up, thumbs down. Some of them not so much. Some of those questions are open-ended, like what pain points do you have, or what do you think about this site? I don't know how well you can see this. I don't know how big your screen is, so I'll send these to you. But I basically make different graphics rather than bullet points to explain this. So the pain points, I made some word clouds of this is what people are saying. I tried to kind of weight it by how often they're said. Since they used multiple words for things, I couldn't generate one with like a generator. But I would recommend the things where they're single word answers, or if you've gave them set choices, to use a generator, a word cloud generator, and it will give you even weights to all of these. Like data design should actually be really big and thick because everyone said that. Right? So it can give you a very quick picture of what they don't like. Outdated, irrelevant information. I made that one bigger on here because everyone said that. They're like, no, the information's not up to date. No one's managing it. We don't know how to find it. Great. So that gives you something that you need to address. That gives you some pain points. You put them all together, and then you can see some things that maybe they're not as important. And from a high level, you can tell very quickly. Other stuff, yes or no. Those are very easy to do. You could do like a bar graph in Excel or PowerPoint. I made this in PowerPoint with a single icon, copied it a couple times and turned one of them a different color and put a number under it. There's lots of YouTube videos on how to do this. I'm not going to give you a PowerPoint lesson, but you can making these things graphical is very useful, especially if the group that's running the project is marketing. They care so much about that. And when you do pretty things, they're like, oh, I understand that now. And you don't have to have technical battles with them. Okay. And there's some other examples of different visuals you can do, pie charts. Maybe if we have time at the end, I can really quickly look at one of my old reports and show you guys, or I can share you some reports after this that shows some of the other visualizations I make. All right. So this next piece. Those technical reports, you have to dig through them with a fairly fine-tooth comb. If you have help, all the better. I definitely would get someone low in the totem pole to do this because it's a lot of work. And again, if you're an outside consultant, it's money because there might be different pricing tiers depending on who's doing the work. But so have someone look through the technical reports and look at the last modified dates to see when stuff was actually done, because there might be a bunch of unused stuff on there. And that's true in Google Sites or anything. You don't want to just bring over everything you have. So look at that immediately and start making recommendations on your architecture report that you made, and recommend archival and deletion for anything older than a set amount. We usually say 2 years. If something is 2 years old and it's clearly not critical, we're going to recommend it for deletion right now. And the users will have to sign off on it later. But I'm going to go ahead and recommend with a bulldozer, not a scalpel, that these entire sites need to go. This needs to go, that needs to go. You want to aim to tear more things out rather than keep everything. Just because you don't know how old that stuff is. You should have an idea based off of your surveys and everything. But it's pretty safe to say if something hasn't been touched in a couple years, you can recommend it doesn't come over. Take some cursory glances at other sites and recommend deletions. That's what I was telling you with those spot checks. If you notice there's something in your report called Bob's site, you may want to take a look at it and see that Bob just made a test site 4 years ago, or maybe he only made it 6 months ago, but it's an empty site. It doesn't need to come over. And then what you do is that from there is you create an architecture plan you create a new architecture, right? You've looked at your stuff. You've got a recommendation of what you're going to keep, what you're going to get rid of. And you're actually then going to decide where it's going to go, because you don't need to necessarily keep the same level, the same sub-sites or anything like that. You might want to move newer. And I will show you that in a second. Again, so when you're done, create a site report that will have the architecture plan built into you. This is the same report that you created earlier, but you're going to add on to it with other columns in Excel to mark that I'm going to get rid of this, I'm going to delete this. This is a hub site. This is a team site. This is a communication site. So you just want to mark what your recommendations are for everything that you have and get all the owners to sign off on that if you're moving stuff. And they say, yep, you're right, we don't need this, or yeah, we need that. And then you can revise your plan until everyone agrees and signs off on it before you even think about moving anything. This saves you a lot of hours on the back end. Any questions on that? Cool. So when you're designing that architecture, what do? Flatten everything. You're already familiar with this since you're using modern in a little bit, but hub sites are the new thing. The new thing are to use hub sites and entire site collections. You can still use sub-sites, but you're not supposed to as much anymore. It's not best practice. It makes it a lot easier to manage when you have a flatter hierarchy with a hub site and associated sites, because if you want to move a site around, you just move it. It's like 3 clicks to move it somewhere else. You don't break all of the sites below it. You don't worry about inheriting permissions. You can decide who owns it. It's just a lot easier to maintain when you flatten your hierarchy. So design the architecture with that in mind. And when you're creating your migration plan, you would say this site is a hub site. This site goes with this hub site. Right? So you just have a spreadsheet that you're working off of when you do your migration, or ideally, then I'm going to talk about it later, a migration script. You have all your ducks in a row. Okay. I probably will throw together some sample migration plans to give you on that as well, but it is basically just the site report that ShareGate spits out with a couple more columns on there to keep track of what you're doing. All right, so now we know what sites we're going to keep. What's the new site going to look like? If you were on an old version of SharePoint or Google Sites, modern SharePoint's not going to look the same. Old SharePoint, you could build master pages and page layouts and put colors wherever you want, and there were a ton of options. But if something, it was also a lot of things that could break, right? I'm sure you've been around for a while. You've seen customizations cause a lot of heartache in older SharePoint environments. So one of the benefits, pros and cons, I guess, to modern SharePoint is the look and feel is fairly limited, though it's getting better every day. You basically have a handful of things that you can put in there. You've got your background color, font color, primary accent color, which you can use this theme generator to create the code that you need. Right. Now you can, once you've made a theme with this theme generator, you can do other things inside there. You can now change colors of individual sections, but you're basically making a set color palette that they can work with and locking it down. You can make more later. You can even teach your users how to make their own, but it's good to pick a generic baseline look and feel for your new modern sites before you do this migration. And if you're working with migration, it'll be like, oh, that's great. Here's a 200-page style guide. And it's like, that's cool. Here's a shredder, and you put the style guide into the shredder because you get those 3 colors, and it builds a color palette for you. You can go in there and in the code and change some other things, but it's not like it used to be where you're going to be using custom CSS and changing individual colors. If you do custom development and force that, an update later down the road is very likely to break things. So this is one of those battles that you need to fight early when you're doing the look and feel, and there's marketing people and a bunch of other hands in the pot figuring out how it needs to look. That's great. What are your 3 colors? This is your color palette. And that, like, you got to put your foot down there. There might be other places you can concede, but it will save you a lot of heartache to fight this battle early. Okay. So you've decided a color scheme. Now we're talking about the site types. You're aware of these now. You're already using modern SharePoint. But if they're using older stuff or a completely different platform, they're not going to know what any of this stuff means. So you need to explain to them what the different types of sites are so that you can decide on your migration plan what type of sites these are going to be. Because if you're in an old version of SharePoint, they're all team sites right now. But they don't necessarily need to stay team sites. Maybe they're going to be communication sites in the future, especially if they're going to be a hub site. So you need to discuss with the people who care about this, and maybe even with some of the site owners, what type of sites these need to be. And you can explain to them, communication site is for a lot of people to see. It's prettier. It doesn't connect with Teams. It doesn't give you an email address. It doesn't give you a shared calendar. This is to display information like published stuff. You can put documents on there. Maybe you can show them an example, especially if you're already using modern sites. Right? You know what a communication site is. It's the new pretty stuff that they're pushing, and it is very pretty. All your hub sites should be communication sites for sure, and really anything that's facing most of the company should be a communication site. Team sites, that is your smaller circle. That's where that comes with a group. You've got a shared email address. You have a shared calendar. This is for collaborating. Maybe you hook it up to Teams. We're using Teams now for this meeting. I hope you guys use Teams in your daily life or are working towards it, because it makes a lot of this collaboration piece almost redundant as far as team sites go. But as we all know, Teams sits on top of it. So you may have to have that conversation if your company or whoever you're doing this for has already adopted Teams or is thinking about adopting Teams. You may want to put that in the conversation again early and decide, because the way migrating something into Teams is slightly different than migrating it into regular SharePoint. And we'll talk about that later when I'm talking about the migration piece. But it is good to know if something is going to have Teams immediately or if you maybe want to use it down the line. Okay, so we've got our color scheme pin. I'm sorry, what was that?
You have Teams on that last slide listed separately from team sites?
Yes, because you can use a team site in SharePoint without Teams. You might be just using Pages, and it's just a regular old school team site. It may not be a classic site. It's going to be a modern team site. Maybe you're hooking up and do it with OneDrive, but you might not be using the Teams piece on top of it.
So when you're talking about Teams, as in the third bullet down here, you're talking about the Teams app, basically,
yeah.
Right?
Exactly. I'm talking about Team, and because a lot of people don't understand that the Teams app is sitting on top of a team site, I keep them as a separate bullet point to explain to them that yes, you can use this and you can actually use both at the same time and put the pages as a tab inside Teams, and their eyes gloss over us at that point.
Yeah.
But
how could they be the same?
Yeah, exactly. So that's when you show them the Files tab and the Team site, and you look Files tab. That's where they have it in common. But so some of my clients don't use Teams at all, so I just tell them about these two. Some of them use Teams, and my main client right now that I just finished this migration for, they use Teams in some places, and sometimes they don't, and they just have regular team sites. So it's good to make sure everyone's on the same page with that. All right. So after that, figure out your navigation. This is one of those things that's living, so that's not really something you need to set in stone right here. But you need to have a conversation about it, because again, if you're working with a graphical advertising, marketing, sales kind of group, they're going to care a lot about all of that stuff, or like a development team or someone who cares about UI. So plan your navigation, and you basically have two separate sets of navigation if you're using hub sites, right? You've got your top hub navigation across the top. And then you've got your local navigation, which is either going to be at the top of a communication site or on the left of a team site. You need to kind of figure out how that's going to look. Are you going to use the same navigation on all the hub sites? Because right now there's no such thing as global nav, but most companies prefer global nav. So are you going to do that? You can, and there's a script you can use to push it across all of them. But you need to decide, are you going to do that? Is there going to be hub sites at all? I hope the answer is yes. But you need to talk about that. Local navigation, you can talk about baseline, but mostly you're just going to be explaining to them that the site owner owns the local navigation. And you just kind of have to have a discussion of what the difference between the two is, because they're like, oh, well, why is my site not at the very top of the hub navigation? It's like, well, because you're an associated site 100 deep off of a hub site, so you're going to drop down off of the hub site. Your other pieces are inside, are in your local nav. So have that discussion early, just get them on the same page with you. Nothing's set in stone there, they can change it in the future, but make sure they're aware of how it works. And now the Mega Nav and Footer are rolling out to the targeted release people. I got mine a couple days ago. They should be out globally in March. So that you may also want to discuss, do you want to use the Mega Nav now, where you can go 3 levels deep and use headers? Do you want to use the new Footer? You can show them that. It's very easy to turn them on and off. But you can basically come up with a default for that, and the site owners can decide based depending on your governance plan, they can decide if they want to use it on an individual site or not. Or you come up with a rule and say no one uses these, or everyone uses them. That's something you need to discuss.
What do you usually recommend as far as a landing page? I mean, I know there's the basic SharePoint app that's customized, but do you use like a global hub site with links to the main?
Yeah, as I drop 1,000 things. Yes, there is an issue right now, as you know, that the root site is a classic site, and you can do some things to make it look like a modern site, but you can't fully make it into a modern site. There isn't currently a way to change that. I've heard rumblings that that may change. I don't know how true they are, so we'll have to wait and see. So there may be at some point a way to change to make the modern site be your quote-unquote root. But what I do now is I just make a site, and it's called like corporate or communication site or whatever intranet site you want to make as your main hub site. And IT typically pushes it as a group policy as everyone's homepage, or changes their bookmarks, or sets a DNS redirect to it. But bunch of different things you can do there. And then from there, they use the hub navigation. So that's part of this planning navigation piece. That's why most of the companies I work with prefer to use the same navigation across all hub sites, because we use that hub navigation to get between all the different hubs. So you can type in companyaa.com, it'll take you to the one that you've designated as your main site, and then you use the hub nav to get to your different hubs. Make sense? Yes. That may change in the future. Meganav makes this a little bit prettier. You can do things with headings to make it a little bit easier to get around now. But at a baseline, I use hub navigation to get between the hubs, maybe with some drop downs under them to their more important associated sites. And then beyond that, there's typically weeks of discussion internally with the teams involved. I can't tell you how many, and it changes. And sometimes they'll be a month after launch, and they're like, "We hate all of this. Let's change it." I'm like, all right, well, okay, as long as you discuss it. All right, after that, simplify your security and governance plan. Maybe you have one, maybe you don't. I heard it's like 47% or something of companies don't have any security and governance plan for any of their software. Some of them have 200-page security and governance plans. Neither of those are great. Maybe you work somewhere, if you work in government, maybe that makes sense because you've got a ton of compliance you have to deal with. But you should take this opportunity of disruption to revisit your security and governance plan and make a better one. So that means figure out who owns the content. Again, so before you had site owners for the content, but they probably weren't managing it. I bet they were calling IT every time they needed a link changed on their homepage. And that should not be the case. They should not be doing that. So part of the security and governance plan should be site owners own their sites and they manage the permissions. IT will fix it if you break something, but it is not IT's job to upload documents to your document libraries. That is your job. IT's job is to monitor, audit, and support you. And so if you're not spending time putting links on the home pages all day, you actually have time to preemptively look and see, hey, this site isn't used, or this site gets a lot of traffic, check it out. Or you can find problems before they happen if you're not putting out fires all day. So that should be written into your new security and governance plan, that IT is responsible for supporting and making sure this stuff stays up, not doing the job of the users. All right, you may want to talk about site classifications. So there's labels you can put on sites. It's like public, private, you can make your own to set different classification levels, and you can even set policies in security and compliance or Azure information protection to enforce that kind of stuff. So if this site is classified, so there's no external sharing on this site, only these people are allowed to see it. Auditing is turned on for sure. So basically come up with like 4 or 5 different classifications for your sites. And I say do this at a site level. Don't necessarily do it at a document level yet. This is baseline simple security plan. So this site is public, this site is private, and come up with different rules for your different classifications. Again, I do 4 or 5 levels of public. You can share this with whoever you want. You can print it out, leave it in a taxi, and we don't care. To classified, if you print this out and leave it in a taxi, you are going to jail and getting fined, like if you violate HIPAA or something. So those are very easy to do. When you make a site, they can pick it from the drop down, because site classifications are one of your options when you're making a new site. So it makes it very easy for a user to say, hey, I know that this we're sharing this with the government agency. This needs to be level 4 or whatever you come up with it. And they just mark that when they create the site, and it can you could build in automatic security and compliance, or it can just be an honor system where you're using it to say, I know this is classified information and I can't share it. So start small with that, just with your labels and classifications, just get it real basic and decide some rules. And then later on, you can enhance that. You can come up with tons of different labels for things. You can go down to the document library. You can put in information rights management, Azure information protection, but you really need to crawl before you get into an airplane and go flying like some of that stuff can do. And if you've got a 200-page security and governance plan that is not at all relevant to this, it's probably time for the shredder for it. It's not fun, but take the disruption that this migration causes as an opportunity to do that. It really helps you in the long run. Okay, so
Can I ask you a couple questions on that one?
Yeah, sure.
With a bunch of people who aren't used to managing their own sites, what do you typically do as far as training them to get them ready to do that?
So it depends. So it depends on your budget for sure. One of my they bought Visual SP for their basic training. They do lunch and learns. They did training for months ahead of time, and they went all out. They threw like little seminar kind of events where people go to them and they have different booths, and you go and sit at the Power App booth, and this is what we've done with the Power App, and things like that. Some of that costs money, some of it doesn't. Some of it you can say, some of it you might have a budget for to get a bunch of Subway in and do a lunch and learn every now and then. Maybe you just have time. You can make videos of you doing these things and put them on stream, and then you can click on them right from SharePoint and say, oh, this is how you create a site, or this is how you add permissions. I typically I like doing the mini videos. If you make like 10-minute videos, you only need to make 15 or 20 different things for the site owners. Here's how you make a list, and some of those are even more advanced. There's only like 5 or 10 real things that the users are doing on a regular basis. Putting documents up, making pages, right? Maybe doing approvals. They're not going to be building their own flows probably. They're not going to be building their own workflows. That's still going to be IT for a while. But you can show them how to create a site, how to delete a site, how to add and remove users. Or you can just maybe have a repository linking to the Microsoft Docs. It really depends on how you want to go. But the more resources you can provide there, the better. And having those champions helps you too, because those champions are usually going to adopt it quick, and they can spread some of that information organically.
Okay. And then as far as the levels of classifications, have you run into situations where there's certain information that they want to make sure is locked down, even from IT being able to access it?
Yes, that happens, and with Modern, that's a real problem, because if they create a site in Modern, IT by default doesn't have access to it. What we did there is we actually put IT, or at least a handful of people in IT, into a group, and then we built that group into the site design for every site that gets made. So when they make a site, IT is already on there. Now, as far as the information that IT can't see, that's tough. I mean, you can put on auditing, but as an IT person, if I can't see all the information, I am now less effective. That I can't get information to your data. And so that's one of the, they can do that. You can let them do it, but they need to know, there needs to be sign off somewhere saying that IT can't help you if you break it.
Right.
So yes, that's a thing. And those classifications, depending on where you're using that, you can enforce them, or maybe you can designate one person in IT. But that's most of what I do there is often honor system, especially with communication sites. With communication sites, when you put those classifications on there, they're not real. They're not really enforced, because communications, those site classifications actually tie to a group, and communication sites do not come with a group. But they still show up there if you enable them. So I do that just to see, as a user, I can see that this is classified, and I know that I can't, I know what to do with it. The other thing you're talking about could be enforced in team sites, as long as with Azure Information Protection or Information Rights Management, or just granular permissions down to the document level. But then you're looking at a governance problem again. It's not sustainable if whoever manages that gets hit by a bus. That I run into that a lot when that's why I try to do all permissions at the site level. And we know that's not going to happen. There's going to be people going down to the document library level and down to the folder level and down to the item level. But I tell them up front that you can do that. It is not manageable long term. If you get promoted and leave, everything you know is gone. So anyway, outputs of this phase of your planning and analysis are those packages that I talked about. There's your migration plan, so you know what sites you're keeping, what content you're keeping, and where it's going. Navigation plan, how are you going to use the hub and local navigation. Security and governance plan, who's in charge of it, how important is it, who does it get shared with, and what does it look like. That's your site theme and designs. And by designs, I mean you can actually build site designs into it, so every time they create a site in SharePoint, they get that design by default. Great. Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left. We'll keep going through this. There's a little bit left. Site architecture and navigation. So we talked about site architecture and navigation a little bit already, but I want to talk about some other things a little bit deeper. Again, flatten your hierarchy. Don't use subsites anymore. Use hub sites. I think everyone here already understands why. This is usually a very businessy audience that I'm telling this stuff to, so you have to explain this to them twice. But flattening your hierarchy, you know why to do that. So you can use hub sites and associated sites. No more subsites means no more inherited permissions that you have to worry about breaking. You can move a site somewhere else without breaking a hierarchy. Right, you can group things in a way that makes sense. You can see the little pictures in my background. I've got some hub sites. Shows here's finance and accounting, and you can see the little dots next to are the associated sites, and they are dotted lines because that means I can move them. They are not hard coded anywhere. So you group things by function or by well, I'll tell you I guess on the next slide. Group everything in a related way. Architecture is dynamic, but group it by departments, which is the most common one I see, or location, division, function. That's how you determine something is a hub site. Basically, is this a group of sites that go together, and what's the common theme there? Cool, that common theme that ties them together is the hub site. These go together. Fine. So I have maybe payroll. I've got finance. I've got accounting. I've got the accountant team site. I've got the accountant communication site. Oh, I got an accountant communication site. That sounds like a hub site to me. So I make the finance and accounting hub site, and then I put all those other sites under it. They're all one level down. They all have their own permissions and stuff, but search goes across them, news rolls up, all of it's security trimmed, so I can see latest documents from that hub site only if I'm allowed to. So you can kind of get everything at a very quick glance. Does that make sense to all of you? Yeah, cool. To me, like I've been in SharePoint for about a decade now, and this architecture makes so much sense to me because you can just move it around. It's very easy to manage. You can show a picture of it, and everyone's like, oh, when I do those technical reports and I make the hierarchy with the hub sites, I sometimes will take the effort of spitting that out into a hierarchy smart object, like a smart drawing on PowerPoint, and start showing what the hierarchy looks like. And I only go about 2 levels deep, and you have like 100 little nodes on that, and you're like, hey, this is what your stuff looks like. And you show them that picture, they're like, oh, is that it? It's like, no, that's 10% of what it looks like. They're like, oh. I'm like, hey, this graphic on a single PowerPoint slide is all of your stuff in the future. We got rid of 80% of your stuff, and you still have all of your functions, and now it's easy to find. And they're like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And even the people who are afraid of change usually are like, wow, all of that makes sense. That's all of the things that I need, and it's in one spot. So that's why you would do that, and that's the battle you want to fight there, and explain why you don't need to go 4 levels down with 1,000 hub sites. And sometimes they won't get that. They'll keep thinking of the associated sites as subsites, and like, oh, well, then we'll just put this one off of this one over here. It's like, well, no, you can't nest them. You don't do subsites anymore. And you can. You guys may have use cases for that, but in a lot of situations, you don't need to do it that way. Especially with the way the permissions are managed and all of this. Okay, again, design the navigation. We already talked about that a little bit. I use it as a global navigation. You don't have to use it as a global navigation. If you have a lot of hub sites, if you have more than 15 hub sites or 17 hub sites, you kind of fill up the top and you start getting those ... to go to more. You could probably fix that by nesting them and making drop downs. But there's a point that you may not want to do global navigation. Maybe you want to do groups of hubs. But design it, figure out how you want to do that. Maybe you want to just do related hubs. Maybe you've got like a whole travel department and they've got like 4 hub sites. Okay, cool. On that hub navigation, you link between those 4 hub sites. Like whenever Microsoft does their demos, they usually do it that way. And decide who controls it. I usually say IT controls hub navigation, site owners own the local navigation. Okay, so does that make sense? We've got all of our planning done. We are ready to migrate. So this is the part that everyone skips to immediately. I see a lot of people on the internet where they're like, hey, can someone help me with migration? And they're like, yep, buy ShareGate. Well, okay, I mean, that's cool sometimes, but you can't just move everything over there and say, ta-da, you're going to do that. And then your users are like, cool, you replaced our old SharePoint with a new horrible one, because it's even worse because now all their stuff's broken. So let's do the migration now. We've decided what we're keeping. Pick out your tools. You don't need to spend money on a third-party migration tool. Maybe you did a manual discovery, so you didn't need all those reports. There's a free one. Microsoft came up with the SharePoint migration tool. It can do on-prem SharePoint to online. It can't do online to online. You need a third-party tool for that. Maybe you want to use scripts. You can build your own scripts. Some of those you could connect the migration API. If you're a developer, you could do it directly. You make your own development and do that. You can do that stuff. I like to pick a tool that can see both my source and destination. So if you got Google, make sure your third-party tool can read Google files. ShareGate can, BitTitan can, old Metalogics could, current Quest Metalogics cannot, and most others can't. There's a couple that can. So look at that. Some do box, some don't. So pick your tool out. You should have already done that earlier if you used it for your reporting. But if you didn't, you're still going to need something to help you do the migration. Okay, build your site structure. So you actually need to go through and build your sites, your new modern sites, empty first with what they look like. I don't like, because you can't really take pages even with a third-party tool, especially since they're old, they're not going to look right. Some of those say that they will modernize pages for you, but in my experience, they don't look great when they do. So I don't bring over old pages. I build new ones, and the way that I do that is I'll give them a text box, and I will put metadata inside the document libraries that determine what page stuff shows up on. I don't have a demo to show you this, but say I have a benefits site, for example. So for your benefits as a regular user, you would go in there and you would want to find out your 401k information. You would want to go find out about your dental and your medical, and you'd read different documents for that. So what I would do is I would make a benefits site, and it would have 5 pages on it, five modern pages. So I'd have one for 401k, one for your one for medical, one for dental, one for any like state specific, whatever you have. I make a page for each of those, and on each page I put some text, maybe some images, and then I put a highlighted content web part. Write this down because it's a very powerful web part. A highlighted content web part that shows documents that are tagged with that topic. Does that make sense? So I have a single document library on benefits. I upload my 401k documents and I tag them all as 401k. They show up on the 401k page. I do the same thing with my medical and my dental. They all show up automatically on the same page. So I have this like predetermined dynamic content, which means the site owners don't have to sit there and do updates, right? They just have to update the Word documents that you care about. The 401k pages probably aren't going to change that much as far as the text goes. So you're basically giving them a very easy way to add content to this all the time with minimal steps, and you're building it empty. So then when you do the migration, you're just going to throw the documents that they have in there, and those third-party solutions actually will let you set metadata so you can tag them automatically and even script that. So you run the migration, it auto tags them. All those documents are going to show up on the right page already. Because I don't know what your environments look like, but if they're older, a lot of people would use like document library web parts or lists with custom views and all of that stuff. But you can use this dynamic search-based web part to it always shows the new stuff. And it's super easy to manage, and the training that you have to give to a site owner is like 5 seconds of, hey, look, open this document library, drag this in here, mark it as 401k or whatever topic it is. shows up on the right page. Sometimes your pages aren't going to be like that, but in my experience, most pages in SharePoint are fairly minimal on content or really outdated, and they really just want to show you how to get to certain list items or documents. And if you make these pages with that default, you can even build a template and you can script all of your build. So all of your modern sites from, site 1 to site 4000, you can do with a single script that you wrote, and I'll talk about in a second, that auto tags everything. And the migration piece is actually the quickest piece of this entire project. I said 6 to 9 months. Like I would say the last 2 months are probably migration and testing. And it's probably about 2-3 weeks to do the migration piece, depending on how big you are. We moved 500 we went from 500 SharePoint sites and 500 Google sites down to about 300 total modern SharePoint sites on my most recent client. We did the whole project in about 6 months, and we're down to I think 100 sites. Their number of sites is coming back up because their users are making teams and stuff. But we basically we're consistently hitting a 60 to 80% reduction of content across these migrations, and that is the goal that you guys should be aiming for on your projects as well. So again, script it. Either build your own scripts or use a scripting language. If you use ShareGate has PowerShell commandlets you can use. That's what I do. I built a script. It looks at a CSV file that lists all of my stuff. And so that script will then create the sites that I want. It sees that this document library goes to this site and this metadata gets tagged. And like this bullet point says, hundreds of sites in days. You click the script. Your biggest concern there is if you do too big of batches, you will get throttled by Office 365 and it takes longer. It'll lock you out. So don't do all of them at once. I just do a handful of sites a day. Depending on how big they are, group them together and do them in batches. Okay, so that migration is the easiest piece. That's why you see someone online and you're like, hey, how do I do a migration? And someone's like, oh, I'll do one for $50. It's like, okay, cool. I mean, I guess they're talking about this part. And even then, that's still lowballing it. But a migration is not just this piece. So you've got it built out. You've done your migration. Sorry, go ahead. You have a question?
Just background noise.
Oh, background noise. Cool. All right, so you've moved all your stuff. Take one final stab at navigation, build it out. Like I said earlier, if you want global navigation across hub sites, you can use a script that uses PNP and builds it for you. Basically, I'm going to release these scripts pretty soon. I haven't finished doing the documents for them, but I'm going to release them as a package of all the scripts that I use for this stuff. And then you basically maintain a CSV file that just pushes your navigation. Or you can build it manually depending on how big your site is or how many people you have doing it. So that's it. You've moved it over, ready for your launch and getting your users to actually use it. Here's how you do that. You need to actually have an adoption plan. I never mentioned adoption plan along the way because adoption should be in the back of your mind all the time. But what you want to do is make sure your users are invested in that. And you do that through some of these steps. Engage them early. Those surveys we were doing earlier when we were getting there, they now know that the project is happening. You don't want it to just be some distant thing. You want them to be invested in the success of the project, and letting them know what it is and like that you care about their opinions on it early, that helps with that. Again, during that, you can identify some of your champions, the people who are like, this is awesome. You'll know who they are. You'll get some of their pain points. Remember, that was one of those questions that I said to ask. You get those pain points and answer those what's in it for me questions. So if someone's gonna be like, oh, I have this process that we have this complicated SharePoint 2007 workflow. It's like, okay, well, it was complicated in 2007, but it's 3 steps in flow now. It's just a basic approval workflow because 90% of workflows are just approval. Cool, so you answer one of those and now you've got another champion because they think you're awesome. Encourage feedback, so that means once you've launched or even during, put some forms up on there to ask people what they think. And so that they can tell you so you can get feedback using kind of like an agile methodology of, hey, that's cool, maybe we can enhance this in the future. Or, hey, maybe this doesn't quite line up to expectations. So that they'll feel like they have a stake, they'll feel like they're heard, they're more likely to use this. And then at the end, depending on what group you're working with, you may want to create a communication plan of how you're going to tell everyone else in the company, how you're going to announce it, and what you're going to do with that. So, hey, we're launching our new intranet, whatever you're going to call it. Maybe you're going to call it SharePoint. Maybe you're going to come up with a new name for it. We're going to launch that. You're going to do an email campaign. Maybe you do lunch and learns. Doesn't matter. Come up with a plan for it and stick to it, just so you make sure that everyone knows. Okay. Do a soft launch. What I mean by that is, it used to be you would launch your entire intranet at once. You would build it from the ground up, but it should be a living thing. You should never be done with it. So launch these pieces as they're done, and you're doing that now. I can see if you've already got modern, SharePoint, and classic, you're doing things as they come, and you really could be doing that. You should be doing that. So build some sites, and some of the groups are going to be ready to launch their site before others. Don't make them wait. Let them launch it. Let them start using it. Get them trained. Let them make enhancements. I did one for this restaurant chain, and the last one to come out was the recipe. Was the recipe hub site, because they had like thousands of recipes and they turned them all digital, and it was amazing what they did. But it was going to hold up the whole launch. It's like, well, why are we doing that? Everyone else is done. Let's let everyone else out, and they'll have to go to the old recipes for now. But don't let that stop you. Don't let one site hold you back. Once you've got maybe your main corporate site, probably launch that one immediately, and then start filtering in your other hub sites as you go. And maybe even go back, if you've got enough people on it, start enhancing your other sites that you've already moved. So you should be doing this agile, kind of a software development life cycle, iteratively. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, nearing the end here. Right on time. Archive or delete your old information. So we already decided what we weren't going to keep, but it still exists somewhere. So decide what you're doing with that. Are you going to delete it? Or are you going to keep it around for a while? Give them a limited time. So is there going to be a buffer after you've launched to go back to it? Or is your stuff gone as soon as you go live? Come up with a plan there, stick to it, and exercise that plan at this point. Finally, shut down your old stuff. Send out notices. You should have been notifying it all this whole time. You probably put up a banner on your old site now saying this site is going away in 2 months. This site is going away in 1 month. Get out of the site. Your stuff is going away. Shut it down, and then you're done. And that's it. So, any questions? I know that's a lot. It's a big process. Like I said, 6 to 9 months. Even on smaller ones. They can get that because that discovery process is so important. Cool. Any other questions?
With archiving, you were just mentioning, are there things you like to put in place to keep it from then becoming a mess again in a year or two? Like you were talking about the benefits side, and every year there's new medical and dental documents. You put something in there to make it easy for them to archive the old ones somewhere so it doesn't get cluttered?
Yes, I've done this multiple ways. So the archive of the old stuff that's one story. That's you either leave it in SharePoint or you throw it in a file share or you just shut it down. For the other stuff, to archive your modern stuff, different companies have different plans on that. One of them who they heavily use Teams, and they archive Teams when they're done, because there's an archival process in Teams. Some of them do that. Some of them make a separate SharePoint site that they then move all of their stuff to. If you've got ShareGate, you can push it that way. Or documents, there's a copy and move function inside modern SharePoint now in the document libraries. Some of them are moving them. Or maybe you just have versioning on and you're overwriting the same documents all the time. Right? There's a few different things you can do there. Maybe you're putting them off-site. Maybe you've got them in OneDrive. The most common one I've seen is either Teams or making a separate archive SharePoint site. Some of them, I had a group that did events, so they would make a separate SharePoint site each time they did an event, because they'd have a bunch of different documents and calendars and different people involved. And so what we came up with that was they would have the event site, and then when they were done with it after that event happened, it would be hooked to the events hub site, right? It's associated with the events hub site or whatever group you want to call it, and then the event happens, and they switch the hub site association to the events archive hub site. So I can go over to the archive hub site and I can search for the old events and I can find all the old documents, but they're not going to clutter up that pretty highlighted content web part I've got on my events hub site that shows all the new sites or not highlight content, I'd probably use the site's content, but site's web part. So that's how you keep it from getting cluttered at that level, at like the micro level. Otherwise, you can do retention policies in there where you can keep documents this long or sites this long and then they shut down. It just depends on your company and how long they actually need to keep it. I like to lean towards you keep this for a year or 6 months or whatever, and then the site gets deleted, and then it's done unless it's marked as confidential or critical or something. So that's part of your expanded security and governance plan that you want to move to after launch.
Whoops.
You mentioned a lot of things you're working on putting out. Where does that stuff go? Where can we find it?
So a couple of things. So collab365.community is where I put all my blog posts and videos. I've got a web series called Under the Hood where I have a guest on. It's usually another MVP. I'm about to start a new season of that probably next month. And that's where we go and we talk. We do a presentation really deep into the weeds, technical. But this stuff I'm putting out is going to be an admin script kit. So it'll be things like creating and deleting sites, creating and deleting teams, migrating using ShareGate scripts with some documentation, and all of those will probably be put on Collab 365.
Great.
And then this I don't know where to put it. Do I just need to email it to you guys? I'll give you the slides for today.
I was just going to say, if you could put that on the meetup site, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, if you could send me a link to that. I don't know if I might have it in my email. But I'll check that, and yeah, I'm happy to upload the slides.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Any other questions?
I think we're good on this end. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. That's a cool meetup. That's awesome that you get to do it at a Microsoft store. I mean, it's fun.
Yeah, it is. We've enjoyed having the opportunity to be here. Nice to have a meeting space that is related as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're similar. We meet in the Microsoft office here, and it's a very small office here in Birmingham.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, cool. We don't. This is the closest one we got in New Hampshire, so we'll take it.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed this. I will get that put up on that meetup for you. And if you have any questions, I'm easy to find. You can follow me on Twitter at Brattoli. It'll be in the slide deck. Collab365.community is also going to be in the slide deck because that's where I spend a lot of my days. I work from home, and I'm usually in there talking to the other people that are there. So
awesome.
Feel free to stop by and say hi.
All right. Thanks again, Nick. We really, really appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Have a good one, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.